As Christians, we know that the Bible is God's Word. It's an instruction manual from the Lord as to how we should live our lives and handle every situation, from family and friends to work and money, and yes, even government. Unfortunately, it appears as though we're moving farther away from being one nation under God. If God is not at the center of our own lives, then how can He remain at the center of our government? Howdy, my name is Melody Allen. I'm a follower of Christ, a wife, native Texan, Texas Aggie, Bible study leader, Christian conservative political activist, and the host of the Patriots Revival podcast. Here on Patriots Revival, we share the good news of Christ and discuss the current political climate in relation to truth in God's Word. In doing so, we hope to educate and inspire Christian conservatives to make a radical return to God's Word as it relates to politics and every aspect of life. And we hope to encourage folks to get involved to help restore God to government. We've got dust on the Bible, so we need a revival, a Patriots revival. Howdy, y'all. Welcome back to another episode of Patriots Revival. I am so excited that you have decided to watch or listen to us today. We have a really awesome treat for you today. Today, we have a guest, and our guest is the great Texas State Senator Bob Hall from Senate District 2. Now, if you're not really familiar with Senate District 2, it's made up of several counties, including my county and Ellis County. It is split, but thankfully I'm blessed to be within Senator Hall's district. It is also made up of Navarro County, which includes Corsicana, Kaufman County, Van Zant County, which is in East Texas, Rockwall, and a little sliver of Dallas County. So if you don't know anything about Senator Hall, he has one of the most conservative voting records in the Texas Senate. He's received a perfect score of 100% and an A+ rating by the Texas Family Project. He is on the Texans for Vaccine Choice Dream Team due to his involvement and voting record for medical liberty. And he has been named a taxpayer champion by Texans for Fiscal Responsibility. Folks, he is that good. And I am so thankful and blessed to have him as my state senator. He has introduced numerous bills during the 88th legislative session in Texas related to issues from election integrity to border security and even protecting Texas kids. One instrumental bill that he authored was Senate Bill 14, which ended gender modification of minors in Texas, which was a huge win for us and the protection of Texas children. He also led the charge on SB 7, which prohibits COVID-19 mandates. And he was instrumental in authoring legislation for a pay raise for Texas teachers in the Texas teacher retirement system. He's a true patriot that answered God's call to serve, and I am excited that he shared his testimony with us on Patriots Revival today. So here is my interview with Senator Bob Hall. Well, good morning, Senator. Thank you so much for joining us today on Patriots Revival. I'm so excited that you've decided to be here. You may or may not know, this is just our second episode, and you are our very first guest for the podcast. So I am honored that you have decided to join us today. We would have loved to have interviewed you in person, but we know that duty calls, and you are down at our state capitol because you're in the middle of another special session at the time of this recording. And looking back at this year, I mean, we are in a fourth special session. You've also had an impeachment trial thrown in there. Let's go ahead and get started and tell us how that's been to be in Austin for the bulk of the year, because I don't think that's happened. And we haven't had four special sessions since, I believe, 2004, before you were elected. And even in 2021, I think there were three special sessions. So what's it been like to be down in the People's Republic of Austin for a good portion of the year?
I'd much rather be in Texas, but it is what it is, and And unfortunately, until we get a different mix of legitimate conservatives in the House, we're probably going to keep having things like this because we just don't have enough people aligned on the principles of good government to get things passed. And so I am hoping we will not have another one, but not to stray too far, but we just had a bombshell dropped yesterday that if it's not out in the public, it will soon be out there. But there have been lawsuits filed that negate this election that just happened
Oh,
in
goodness.
November, and on negating the outcome of the propositions that were on there. So we
Oh,
just
wow.
learned about that last night, and we'll be working to try to figure out what we do because that has a significant impact in that most people have already received their property tax bills.
Yes, sir.
Now needs to realign to that, and so those bills cannot be signed until the court process has been satisfied,
Wow.
and that could take a while. Actually, we
Yes, sir.
have a proposition from 2021 that has still not been satisfied that's sitting out there. So that is so we're looking at what we can do to try to fix that. And the incredible opposition we've gotten from House members on school choice and it was very surprising. I know people have a different opinion on things, but we're talking. It's not like we were doing something that is in the blind, brand new. Nobody's ever seen what would happen. We modeled what we're doing after what they did in Florida, and watched how successful that was because it focused on low income students who we know struggle in school. We know they have a problem in the government schools, and it focused on those with special needs, which we always have a hard time meeting those special needs because they are special and they meet broad. The spectrum of uniqueness is very broad in there, and so that's where the focus was, and it had no impact on school funding at all, and it would have no impact on teacher employment. But the lies and misrepresentations about those who are desperate to protect the system as it currently exists is a big one. I mean,
You too.
school system is the biggest employer in the state, and when they tell the teachers if this passes, you're going to lose your job, it scares them, and it's not true. But then the truth has never been known to be one of the weapons that those that are opposed to something like this would use. So,
Yes, sir.
I don't know whether it'll be back again, whether it'll be over with. We're going on the floor today to try to get the funding bill for the border, which is a good bill that's been passed the House and the Senate, sitting on the governor's desk to be signed, which was a very it's a bold bill in that it steps up and says, we have found a way to work within the Constitution in our interpretation of it. Because the big problem here is immigration is a federal issue, and the federal government says, hands off states, we're going to take care of immigration, and here's how we're going to do it. And the way they've done it is to open up our borders completely and invite in, encourage folks to come in so that the drug dealers, the sex traffickers, the child pornography folks, all those who dealing illicitly can easily hide their couriers and the terrorists that are now coming into our country in these uh, should have women and children in and said, oh, it's just people coming here looking for a better life. Uh, well, that's just not true and know it. But we have a federal government that has gone rogue. There is no question about it. The law enforcement at the federal law off level can no longer be trusted. They have demonstrated that they are lawless and that they are independent and they are going to do whatever they want to do. I saw all morning about how corrupt the Justice Department, the FBI, the court system out of Washington, the ICE, the Border Patrol, the CIA, all of those agencies are corrupted to the core. It used to be we had a few personnel within the agencies that could work together and take advantage of their position in dealing with cartels and drug dealing, things like that. And they do it. Now what we're seeing are the agencies themselves setting up so they're actually functioning and operating to cover up crime. I mean, we've seen it. It was a little bit all the way back with the Kennedy assassination, and it's grown over the years with the Vince Foster and other assassinations taking place. And now we see with the Biden family that the FBI has known about them being agents of China for almost 15 years. And top level CIA, FBI agents have covered it up. That's just the kind of stuff that has led to where we are at the border. So to get back to that part, we passed a bill that says that it is illegal to enter Texas from a foreign country except at a legal port of entry. And it's a Class A misdemeanor. So those that are coming across any place other than port of entry will be arrested. There'll be a background check. If there's something in there, they'll be sent to whoever has the warrant out for their arrest. Otherwise, they'll be photographed, fingerprinted, DNA taken, and they will have a trial date set for their Class A misdemeanor. Then they'll be given a choice. They can either go to trial for that, and when they get out of jail, they will be deported back to Mexico and not allowed to return because they have a criminal record. Or they could just turn around and leave right then. No criminal record, but they will be prohibited from returning to Texas. So there's a lot of wailing and moaning over that, a lot of accusations that we are usurping federal authority. I don't think so. I think what we're doing is taking the necessary steps that we need to take as legislators whose obligation is to protect the people of Texas. Yes, I took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. I did twice, once in the Air Force and every time I've come into office. I don't see that being violated at all. I see that being violated if I know that there are ways we can protect the people from what's happening to them. Then we have to do that. And when I say protect the people, it doesn't mean just violence out there, because what we're seeing is very similar to what King George did to the colonists when he forced the people to house, feed, and otherwise provide all the provisions for troops that he sent over here. He made them spend their money on. Well, that's what we're doing. It's our tax money. The federal government does not have any money except that it takes out of the pockets of the citizens. And they're taking that money and they're using it against our will to do things that they have no real authority to do it.
Right.
And besides, in the hierarchy, people tend to forget the federal government did not create the states. The states created the federal government. And the created is never greater than the creator. It was the states that created the federal government and gave them their authorities and limitations. And it was the states that created the counties and the cities and other municipalities and gave them their authority. So the government of the people is actually the state level that started this whole thing. And so looking at that bill, it will be challenged in court very quickly. But we also have our bill that did get a temporary restraining order where the federal government was destroying state property by cutting our wire. That will be going all the way to the Supreme Court on that one, because I don't think they have that authority.
Yes, sir. Well, let's talk about that a little bit more on the border. So there have been some wins for us this year, and like you mentioned, just the passing of SB4. But I think Texans and Americans as well, we feel like more could still be done. So what do you think? Why do you think it's such a challenge to get border security legislation passed in Texas?
It's a mix we have of legislators of not having enough legitimate conservatives in the Republican Party to pass conservative legislation. We have a significant number who are elected. When they take a look at the head count of Republican versus Democrat voters, they say, gee, if I'm going to run in this district, I've got to run as a Republican. Their objective is to be elected. It is not to serve the people with conservative principles of the Republican Party, but they don the costume just so they can get elected. But then once they get here, their actions are those of in their chest beats the heart of a liberal Democrat, and their actions are reflected accordingly. And unfortunately, what we have is a system in which the people don't pay any attention to what elected officials do. They have no idea that they say one thing when they're in home in the district talking about what they're going to do. I mean, we've got a race going on right now in House District 2. That is a good example. We got one of the candidates from the county that's been interested in politics for a long time and has been basically a liberal, absolutely adamantly opposed to school choice as an activist. Beat up on me a number of times for being pro school choice. And when this seat came open, she decided to run for office, and so all of a sudden she is now pro school choice. And when asked about that by another activist, would said, I thought you were absolutely against school choice. What happened? She said, well, I was when I was an activist, but now that I'm running for office, I need votes. And so I'm for it. And so that's what happens. And that's what people will say one thing in the district, do one thing, and then come to us, and people don't pay enough attention to what their elected official does. And also, they don't look at their voting record. They don't look to see where they stand on issues when they're down here in Austin and speaking in a committee or voting in a committee. Those committee votes are very important, just as important as the votes on the floor that tell you who the person really is. And so people will go back the next time around. They say, "Oh, I voted for them before. You know, I like I like their dog. You know, I like the car they drive. It was a real nice spouse. They'll have some crazy reason." And one thing you can probably relate to, because I imagine you're one of those who gets the phone calls. About 80% of the people who vote before they head to the polls, they know they don't know who's on the ballot except maybe the governor, lieutenant governor, maybe their senator, maybe their congressional or so on. But they got other people and they'll call and say, who should I vote for? Just before going there. And they'll write it down on a piece of paper and then they'll go vote for it, having no clue who they're really voting for.
Right.
I know you've seen it happen, you've heard it happen. And so that's how we end up with people there that makes it difficult for us to pass this.
Yeah, and I will say that's part of the reason why I feel like God laid it on my heart to start this podcast so that we can inform and educate and encourage Christian conservatives to be active and to be involved. And Senator Hall, the reason I wanted to have you as my very first guest on the podcast is because the very first time I met you and Miss Kay at our Ellis County GOP meeting in December of 2021, back when redistricting had just occurred, and we had the opportunity to meet you and hear you speak at our meeting. I was so inspired by the story that you shared of how you got involved and why you got involved. And I would love for you to share that today with our audience of your background and because I've tried to recreate the story to my family and friends and colleagues and have told a lot of people about you, but I thought what better way to do that than to have you on the podcast and have you share your testimony of why you got involved in the political process.
Well, I'm still trying to figure that out myself because there's nothing I ever really intended to do. But, God is in control. And the sooner people realize that he truly is in control, that there is divine providence here, there's nothing happens by accident. There is nothing of chance. It's all in a big plan. And really, I'll give you if I'll give you the longer version of it, but I didn't realize what had happened to me until I started getting involved in actually running for office, that I couldn't figure out why I had been involved in things that I had been involved in prior to that, because it made no sense to me at all. As I know, I became very disappointed in what was happening back in high school. My plan in high school I was going to go to college and be a hot shot football player. That's the big deal. I was going to University of Florida, Florida State, and I'd been captain or co-captain of the football team, the basketball team, and that's what I had in mind. And I ended up with a back injury that put me in hospital and traction for about 6 months, and it really set me back because it meant there was no way I was going to go play football anywhere. And so I was kind of like, okay, what am I going to do here? And I stumbled through and, you know, got involved in academics quite a bit. I ended up going to the state fair with a couple of times with some really neat things. One time I took a robot that I'd made out of TV parts and radio parts to the state fair and got an honorable mention with it. And I took solid state rockets the following year and things and some similar things. And so I thought, well, I think I'm probably going to be an engineer, but didn't know. But my best friend was a year ahead of me, and we both played quarterback. And he had gotten a scholarship to a little school in South Carolina called the Citadel. He invited me up in the springtime of my senior year and said, "Come on, visit me. This is see what we do up here." And so I went up there and for the weekend and looked around, and in the background over there during Thanksgiving and Christmas prior to that, most of my friends that I played football with or went to high school with or were a year ahead of me were all back home having flunked out of school, either partying too much or whatever, but they flunked out at Thanksgiving or Christmas time. And I said, man, that's going to happen to me. And I looked at the regiment of a military school where they lock the doors at night and, and everything is regimented. I said, that's maybe I need that discipline here to get me straightened out. And, so talked to my folks about it and they were fine. Dad was a disabled veteran and, great respect for the military. So he thought it was great. And so I said, okay, I'll do that and get myself straightened out. So they took me up there that first year, dropped me off at the gate. Nobody realized that when I got out of the car, I disappeared into that place and they didn't see me again until later in the year. But the first thing I went to was a course or a lecture on the honor code, that they live by the honor code. You don't lie, you don't cheat, you don't steal, and you don't tolerate those who do. And that's the way you're going to be here, or you're not going to be here. And there are no exceptions to that, period. Uh, it happens quick. You'll be gone within 24 hours and so on. And so that was just the first, and there were several after that. And that, that was fine because I was raised in a fairly honest family, church going Christian. So it was very consistent with the background I had, but I thought it was great that everybody around, somebody said something to you. It was all about, you didn't have to be on their own. If you gave somebody bad information, it was lying. And so that was that one part. The other it was a tough year, physically, mentally. You're fully, under a lot of pressure, 24 hours a day almost. Get a lot of sleep, etc. But the one thing I learned there is to get through it, you just never, never, never quit. No matter what it is, you may get beat, outdone, but you don't lose because you quit. And so when the end of the first year came around, I had a choice to make. I had planned to be there for a year and then go back to one of the Florida schools. And my conversation, I said, "You do that, you're a quitter." And I said, "I know I'm going to get the ring. I am going to stay here. I'm going to get the ring." Besides, by then I decided I was going to be an Air Force fighter pilot. And so I got an Air Force contract. I took to the military way of life there very well. I ended up being the top Air Force cadet in my class, battalion commander, lieutenant colonel, cadet lieutenant colonel, captain of the skydiving team. and I got an engineering degree in electrical engineering, all at the same time. Uh, now I was not a plus student. I was a rock solid C student, but I did it without failing anything. I never failed a subject, but I got out. And so I was really a senior year. I was ready to go. I just couldn't wait. If I took my last physical just before graduation and couldn't pass. I had bad vision, 20/25. 20, that's just barely. But they said, nope. And there was no fixing it. There was no fixing it. You were in and out. You couldn't go to flight school wearing glasses. Now you could back into glasses once you got into flight school. Uh, but that was what said, nope. So they said, well, we're going to send you someplace else. Where would you like to go? And you get it so far. I've described everything as I had nothing to do with any of this stuff that happened along right there. It
Right.
was it was God's hand guiding it. Uh, I didn't know anything about the country. I was raised in Tampa, Florida. I'd been driving back and forth between Tampa and Charleston for 4 years. I've seen a little bit of the corner of Georgia as I went through it in Savannah. I visited some folks in Alabama one time, but that was it. And so I had, they said, you're really going to give me a choice? I said, yeah, because we've got to change your assignment at the last minute. So when I go in, the colonel there said, when I go in there, there's part of the country you'd like to go to, just tell me. And so I thought about it, and I had just seen an Annette Funicello movie. And so I said, I want to go to California. And and he says, oh, okay. So he came back with two assignments, possibly. One was in San Francisco and the other was just outside of Los Angeles. Well, I knew where Annette was Los Angeles. I took that assignment. And that was totally providential because it ended up being with the Air Force's Ballistic Systems Command, which was the agency that was designing and building Minuteman intercontinental ballistic missiles. This was our big weapon against the Russians, the weapon that put us into MAD, mutually assured destruction. It allowed us be in a posture that it didn't matter whether the Russians started the war or we started the war. Both sides were going to lose. But when I got there, they looked at my orders and they said, well, we can't accept this. You're a second lieutenant and you don't have a master's degree. And I said, well, that's right, but I have orders to be here. And I said, no, we have a dispensation. We don't have to take anybody here that's not a senior captain with at least a master's degree. And so they said, well, let's see what we can do. We'll find something for you. So for about 3 weeks, I interviewed with colonels all over this program office. We had hundreds of people working in it, designing the next generation of Minuteman missile. And everybody say, gee, you seem like a nice young guy. You'll probably do real well someday, but I just can't give up this slot to a wet behind the ear second lieutenant. And anybody's been in the military can understand that because everything in most cases more worthless than a brand new second lieutenant. So I spent a lot of time at the Yale Club. I learned how to shoot pool real good. One day I got an interview with this major, navigator major from Alabama. He had been a Naval Academy graduate, and he had been out of town for the 3 weeks I'd been there. But the office said, "I'll let you." This Allie White was his name. And he said, "Let you interview with him." And he's about the last one we got to talk to. So I did, and he and I hit it off real well. We got to talking about football, and you would not remember this, but some would. It was the year right after John Heward had won the Heisman Trophy out of Notre Dame, and the New York Jets had hired him and this other gimpy quarterback out of Alabama by the name of Joe Namath.
Oh,
And we both agreed that John Heward better put his $200,000 in the bank because Namath was going to be the quarterback. And so we hit it off from that. I just tell that because uh, it was amazing how I connected with someone on a subject that I would have never thought we would have talked about in that environment. But that started it off. And after about 3.5 years in that position, where I was just kind of started off shuffled into the corner, I'd worked my way up to having a reputation of being a problem solver. People had a little knotty problem. They wanted, well, we're going to talk to Captain Hall or Lieutenant Hall, most there, Lieutenant Hall. about this and see what he says about it. And so I was doing that, and I'd had a couple of major, programs by them that I worked on. So some folks showed up out at the program office from DARPA, that's the Pentagon Scientific Office, and they said, we have a new threat against the Minuteman missile system that leaves our whole weapon system totally impotent, and it took completely unbalances mad, which meant what we had was if the Russians started the war, we were toast, that we would have no ability to respond. The threat they were talking about was called the EMP pin down threat, electromagnetic pulse. Brand new threat. We learned about it a couple of years before that in doing our high altitude nuclear testing, that when we detonated a nuclear weapon outside the atmosphere, it created a huge electromagnetic pulse that damaged electrical equipment on the ground. In fact, we physically experienced that in Hawaii. When every time we set it off, we in the islands, we would knock out the grid system in there. And of course, they were small and a lot different than we have today, because that was in the early '60s. And so they said, we've got to do something, because while we designed Minuteman to survive a nuclear war, we were thinking kinetics. We were thinking, big bombs with big blasts blowing things up. So we had very hard, solid silos and control centers, but nothing for this electromagnetic pulse. And to make matters worse, it was nothing that we said, well, get an EMP weapon too, and then that'll balance us out. Couldn't do that, because our technology was so far advanced ahead of the Russians. We used integrated circuits in our guidance system. The Russians were using vacuum tubes to run their computers, and they were impervious to this. So anyway, the program floundered. I just knew about it because I worked in advanced programs. But after several weeks, the general stopped the development and said, this is not working. We have got to have this fixed in now, and get rid of all these delays. And so he reorganized, and I had just made captain. That made me a very junior captain, and I got picked to be the project officer. And I was not even in the right office to do that, but that's what the general did. But the tough part was the team that I was going to be put in charge of were 9 colonels, full colonels or lieutenant colonels. I came out of World War II, crusty old colonels, and they didn't cotton much to reporting to a junior captain. But we get through that. That's a story in itself. But I'll just say we got through it. And so soon after that, I left the Air Force because I couldn't fly, and I saw no future for me, particularly not being able to fly. So I left. I went into the corporate world, decided that working for a big company wasn't what I wanted to do. So started my own company, a couple of different companies, went through my whole life. I never told my family or anybody what I had done in this highly classified, because that was the highest classification we had, because it was like we had to be in special rooms to even talk about anything that was going on, so that none of the discussions could be recorded or monitored in there. So I never talked to anybody about it. We left that and went off to had a couple of businesses, doing some fun things, some hard things, but ended up deciding when it came time to sell my business to retire, and I was going to do that in Destin, Florida. I want to get back to the beach. We had water sports businesses that like things like parasails and jet skis and pontoon boats, and it was going to be a neat way to just kind of finish life out at the beach, the business. But along the way, I had married a Texan, and I did not know that Texan women are like monarch butterflies. And when grandkids show up, they come home to roost. And so she handed me a note one day and said, this is where I'm going to be in Rockwall, Texas, if you care to join me. The kids need grandparents. And so I couldn't argue with that. So I said, okay, let's do that. And so we came back, and I said, how about we just cut a deal here? If I'm going to have to leave the beach and go to Texas, can we at least build a house at an airport where I can have my airplane? I did, since they used to use my GI Bill to get a commercial instrument, multi-engine ratings and flying as much as I could. Uh, and could we live there? She says, well, as long as it's within an hour's drive of Rockwell. And I said, okay, that's good. So we found a little place in Van Zandt County. It couldn't have been any place else. It was going to, it had to be, I'm talking about in the providence of God. It turned out when we drove out there, she just liked the drive. She liked the area. I said, this would be fine. And so we ended up, we built out there, and that just happened to be right at the time the Tea Party was starting up. Now, I was as apolitical as anybody you've ever met. I didn't know states had government. I mean, I knew they had them, but I didn't know they did anything. I thought they were just positions. I had no clue. But for some reason, when I heard about this Tea Party meeting that was being held, I mean, I'd heard about George Bush. I didn't like his idea of TARP. I thought that was bad. I'd heard this guy Obama talking. He scared me to death. And I said, well, shoot, I got some time on my hands. Let's go to this meeting. Now, what we were going to do in this retirement, because we retired, we sold business and we're going to do mission work. We were qualified with Southern Baptist Disaster Feeding and the Texas Baptist Disaster Feeding Unit. And we were motorhome. We were set to travel to disaster areas and feed people. We've done that. We were doing, and thought that was really neat because it was an opportunity to introduce people to Jesus. And in the training we had, they pointed out to us as the food is secondary. We are using that as an excuse to get in front of people and talk to them about our Lord Jesus. And so I thought that was just really going to be neat. And so that's what and I signed up for Angel Flight, to Angel Flight's organization that will fly people, the people that have airplanes that just volunteer their time plane to fly those who can't afford to go to their medical needs or should not be on a commercial flight. So that was going to be our life. I went to the Tea Party meeting, and that night there was a guy there that gave an incredible presentation around the book called The 5,000 Year Leap by Cleon Skousen. If you haven't read it, I've read it now 3 times, and I will read it again because it's a fantastic book that explains how this group of 40 old white men, 40 something old white men, average age 44. They called old men. They were average age 44. Got together with very different viewpoints about things, but worked at looking at republics over the last 5,000 years. Went back and picked the best parts of those republics, blended those principles with biblical principles, and created probably the second greatest document ever written, our Constitution, Declaration of Independence. I consider those one document. I mean, they're just a declaration, just a prayer of the Constitution, but they created that in an environment that nobody would thought they could have possibly have done that. And I thought that was wow. I knew a little bit about history but I had not put it in the context of how significant it was in forming America. And then you coupled that. So I got that book and read it and was somewhere in it. And I was at another event, and somebody came up to me with Tom Brokaw's book called The Greatest Generation. And that book was with the generation. That was my dad. That was my granddad, my aunts, my uncles. The neighborhood that raised me all came out of World War II. I can remember the end of World War II, and just little flashes here and there. But but the whole through life, I realized, this is a group that lived through the Great Depression, took on the two biggest, mightiest armies in the world in opposite ends of the world at the same time. Women came out of their homes and went into the factories and started building planes and tanks and bombs. And we just turned to and went out to defend liberty. We didn't conquer either one of those nations. We didn't conquer. We beat them, but then we delivered liberty, American liberty, to the people. Just got rid of the bad leaders. There's not one country that we ever got a square inch of land from, except to bury our dead. That was it. And I thought, wow. And when they came home and I can wear, that, so that part of it. It was, we moved in to the 50s time frame. They're very quiet. They just put away their weapons, climbed on their tractors, picked up their briefcases. Some women came out of the factory, some stayed in. Uh, but we had God in our schools, God in our governments, God in our courts, God in our homes. Very low divorce rate. Drugs were almost unheard of. Teen pregnancy was almost non-existing at the time. And then they handed it off to my generation. They handed it to mine. And what did we do? We took God out of our schools. We took prayer out of our schools. Teen pregnancy went up. Drug use went up. Divorce rate went up. Spending went up. Debt went up. All the bad things started happening on my watch. That was my generation that did that. And I thought, in a conversation with some folks about God, what a mess we're in, dawned on me that if things didn't change, my generation was going to be remembered as the first generation of Americans to leave a country worse than what we'd inherited.
Mm.
And that didn't sit well with me at all. That didn't sit. And I said, gee, I think maybe I need to get a little involved in this. And I remember so I got involved in the Tea Party meeting, and I offered one lady that had started the one in Canton, and we had three of them that were started. One in Van, one in Edom, and then the one in Canton. And so I helped the lady that the one in Canton. I said, sure, I'll let do this thing. So I was kind of like the vice. We had no titles. I mean, it was like they were just happenings there.
Right.
The one in Edom prospered, did well. The one in Van floundered and failed. It is led by a lady who's currently running to be a House member right now, but she destroyed that Tea Party meeting. But the one in Canton went on, but the lady that started it, she developed Crohn's disease. And she said, Bob, I said, I can't do this. She said, I've got to take all the stress out of my life. And so it's yours. It was just attitude. And I said, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with this? So we just, I said, okay, we'll do this. So we're holding meetings about every 2 weeks. And we would get anywhere from 75 to 250 people come to our meetings. We made a gosh awful old building for a while. And one of the folks said, I talked to my pastor and he said, we can use our fellowship hall for our meetings. And so we moved over there and we had some great meetings. And, we started working about realizing, when we got involved in protests. And one day I was sitting around talking, I said, guys, we spend a lot of time protesting stuff that people do when they get into office. I said, there's no end to this. What we need to do is move this up and start our focus on people in office. And we need to do more about who we elect to office. And so we moved from doing flag waves and posters waving and things like the overpasses and things like that to actually helping candidates win. And in, I think, 2010, we got about 23 new members in the House in that time. And then come around for the next election, 2012, and realized that our senator from our district was the most liberal senator in Texas.
Mm.
And so I spent 2 years trying to find someone to run against him. Nobody would do it. Nobody was interested in doing it at all. And so at the end, Kay was working with me in the Tea Party some. And we prayed about it. We talked about it, said, if not now, when? Not us, who? And so we prayed about it. Now, if she were here, she'd tell you, yeah, I was praying, God, don't let him go. Yes, no. And, but anyway, so nobody else to do it. So we decided to get in, my opponent managed to pull a last minute trick on the Republican Party, and they removed me from the ballot. They claimed I had not been in Texas long enough, but they did it at a time that the clock ran out for getting on the ballot, and I'd had to go to court uh, to get on there, and that was going to cost a lot of money. So I said no. Well, that was a year of redistricting. So they did redistricting, and lo and behold, he drew a 2-year term,
Wow.
short. And so I said, okay, 2 years is not that far off. So I stayed in the fight. And and the interesting point here is it hurt me so bad to get kicked off that ballot. It was like, okay, God, I thought I was doing what you wanted, and you did, let this happen. Why? Well, I learned why a little bit later. I wasn't ready that first time around. I didn't know enough, and I couldn't have put it together. And he said, he just patted me on the head and said, we're going to educate you a little bit. You're going to learn. And so in 3 years, right after it came around, I knew a whole lot. And in the process, I knew I'd had to learn about campaigns. I had no clue. I'd never heard of a consultant. I'd never heard of a campaign man. I got on Amazon and ordered 3 books on how to run a campaign in there. And it's okay. And I did it. We ran the campaign ourselves. Um, and the amazing thing were the people that showed up and people that gave me advice. And one of the early pieces of advice I got was from a good friend down in Dallas. And he says, Bob, you're a good Christian, and you know, you're gonna have God there with him. Just recognize that whenever you need something, don't keep it from him. Tell him what you need, and he'll provide it. Well, Melody, the first time I tried to tell God, here's what I think we need to do, he slapped me side the head and he says, "You think I don't know what you need? You're going to tell me what?" I literally, as I stopped in the middle, I said, "No, God, you're right." I said, "You got me doing this. My job is make ready the horse for the battle. The outcome is going to be yours. I know it's in your hands." I said, "Let's leave it that way. You just provide me with people. You provide me with money, and whatever as you see fit." I said, "I'll just ask for a couple of things. One is help me say the right thing at the right time, because I have a tendency to speak before I think sometimes, but help me say the right thing. But when it's all over with, and if I don't win, I don't want to be bitter, because that's what I saw in people that didn't win. They got bitter and they disappeared. And I said, if I win, I don't want to be arrogant. So just show me what you want done." And so we did. And God had a great sense of humor. He gave us no money, but people showed up from all over. I had mothers bring their homeschool kids down from northern part of Collin County and other places to say,
Wow.
"Can we block walk for you?" I was sitting there one day thinking, God, they keep telling me I need a campaign plan. What is that? I'm going through the book and I'm not getting anything out. And the phone rings. And there on the phone was uh, one of the Tea Party leaders from Dallas. He had been one of the initiators. You may have known him, Kenny Magnuson. Ken was one of the originators of the Dallas Tea Party, along with about 3 others. And we chit chatted, and he said, "Well, what you got for a campaign plan?" I said, "I don't. That's what I'm trying to put together." And he laughed, and he said, "Can I help you? Would you like for me to write one for you?" And I said, "I'd love it." And he said,
Wow.
"Okay, send me this." He gave me a list of stuff, and I immediately put it together, got it in an envelope that afternoon, and sent it to him. And by the end of the week, he had sent me back a campaign plan with it. And so we had something to work with. I was at one of the meetings, and this guy comes up to me. I'd never seen him before. He was shorter than I was, and had the same last name. His name was Stan Hall, but no relationship. And he said, he had his paper ready to write down. He says, "What's your website? I want to go take a look at it." And I looked at it and says, "What website?" I said, I said, "I wouldn't know what to do." He said, "You don't have a website?" "No." He said, "Would you like one? I'll make it for you." And
Wow.
so he said, "I'll make you a web." And he did. And about 3 days later, I had a website.
Wow.
And I mean, it went on and on and on like that. Of God just intervened along the way. And again, no money coming up. We only raised about $16,000, and a good bit of that was my money in there.
Mhm.
He spent over $500,000, but we
Mm.
got into a runoff, and he missed winning out of 30, almost 40,000 votes, 78 votes more, and he would have won outright. But we
Wow.
had this third candidate in there that siphoned off enough votes with his single issue that he talked about, which was toll roads. Every event we had, the only thing he ever said was he'd stand up and look at the audience. He's quiet, and other than just looking at him, and you say, "I hate toll roads." In the room where it runs. Yeah, yeah, but he didn't have anything else to say. So, but anyway, we got into a runoff, and when that happened, all the people that had kind of patted me on the head and said, "You know, you seem like a nice guy, and you probably do all right, but you are not going to earn a seat at 12-year income. No way you're going to do that, and we're not going to get ourselves in trouble with you, by supporting." Well, all of a sudden, we're in a runoff, and I get phone calls from folks volunteering to help. And I said, "Why is all this all of a sudden?" I said, "Well, don't you know, it's a runoff, and an incumbent that gets drawn into a runoff loses over 86% of the time." So I get phone calls. "Can I help you?" I get one from who's now a good friend and helped me quite a bit and was worked for me for a number of years, Luke Macias, who was a consultant. Luke called me and talked about what our plan was. And I said, "Well, we're just going to keep knocking on doors and putting out signs and this and that." And he said, "Well, who's your consultant?" I said, "I don't have one." I said, "Jay and I've done this whole thing, and people there, we just did what we thought needed to be done in this thing." And he says, "Well, you really need to have somebody that's looking at it that's not deeply involved in it." I said, "Well, that's nice, Luke, but I have no money." I said, "Jay and I agreed when we started this, we would not put our life savings into getting elected. That is not what our goal is here." And so we either will or won't. He said, "Well, how about," I said, I'll help." And I said, "Well, fine, Luke, but I don't have any money." He said, "That's okay." He said, "If you don't win, then fine. You don't owe me a thing." He says, "If you do win, you'll get lots of campaign donations and support, and we'll work out a settlement after that." So that's what we did. And that happened, other people. So we did. So that we got through, Jay and I we were at the polls all through early voting. Election day, we were there. We decided our strategy was to go to the single largest uh, polling location in the district, not drive from one to the other. I said, "I was wasting a lot of time on the road going through. I was going to stay in this one place." That's where, so we did. We stayed there, and we left there election day uh, for the runoff. And about 7 o'clock, because we were talking to people still coming out afterwards and so on. And driving home, we were kind of laughing and giggling and think, "Well, we're going to load up the motorhome tomorrow and head back to Florida, sit on the beach for a while." "Yeah, that sounds good. Let's do that. Or maybe we'll go to Branson." "That's good. Yeah, we can do that too," or whatever. If we were ready, life goes on, and we didn't. And so we got to the house, and the house was packed. I mean, we had orange shirts that that people wore with the right Bob on. And that in itself is a story, because we were both Bobs, Bob Dewell and Bob Hall. Hard left Bob Dewell and hard right Bob Hall. He kept referring to me as a right wing. And one Sunday, early in the campaign, one of the guys in church stopped me. I just passed in the hallway. And he says, "Oh, the wing nuts." And I says, "Yeah, I guess so." He says, "Well, that brings you to the right, Bob." I says, "I guess so." And I didn't think about that. I mean, I just laughed and gave and went on with the finished church. But Monday morning, I woke up early, sat up in bed and said, "That's it. That's our calf slinger. I'm going to be the right Bob." And so we put that on our t-shirts. And I still meet people today who say, "Oh, it's the right Bob." The stuff, the double meaning and all like that was in there. And it just stuck. And so everybody had the shirts on. And as we watched the returns, and when it didn't change. Sometimes as a posting, it'd be one vote difference. One
Wow.
vote back and forth. Sometimes 25, sometimes 50, not as much as maybe 200 at one time, and so on. But when it came down to it, and the Secretary of State called it, and when it was all over with, we won out of a little over 30,000 votes. We won by 300. Exactly 300. Not 301, not 300, exactly 300. And I started getting text messages and phone calls from people that said, "You got the Gideon win." Now, I was thinking at first, "Man, if we won this by 301 votes." See, his bill that we campaigned on was SB 301, which was a bill that would have given hospitals the authority to terminate the life of anybody they choose to once they went to the hospital. The family no longer had a say in terminating life. And everybody thought that was a terrible, terrible bill. So we campaigned heavily on that. I'll say 301, that'd be great. But 300, they call it the Gideon.
Wow. It's amazing.
And for those that are not familiar with that, Gideon showed up, was going to go into battle, had over 30,000 men, and says, can't do that. Well, I'll let you fight this battle with 30,000 men, plus you'll think you won it. I'm going to give you 300. And then when you won that I did.
Amen.
And so that's what we did. We won by 300 votes. And so at that time, I mean, the only promise I ever made to folks, because I really didn't know what to do. I was just learning what government did. And policies, I mean, I could talk about being conservative and some of the issues for doing it. I said, folks, the only thing I can promise you is I'll go to God every day on my knees and ask for your wisdom, your courage, and your strength to know and do your will. And you tell me what I need to do, because I'm smart enough to figure this out on my own. And so I did. And it was interesting that after the first session down there, the people gave me the tag, the promises made, promises kept. You went and did what you said you were going to. And I was using that before Abbott or before Trump. I started using.
Right.
But my point is, it was that God's divine providence that I am where I am, and I will be here until I feel He's leading me to do something different, or just takes me out. So,
yes, sir.
Bless me with good health, and I plan to take advantage of that and just continue doing what I'm doing. I will not change. I've told people that as Texas moves, and as I'm talking about it turning blue or the district turning blue, I said it may. I mean, that may happen. But one thing I will also promise you is I will not turn blue with it to stay in office.
Thank you.
I will continue to be a conservative with my Judeo-Christian values. No matter how blue it gets or how lonely it gets, I will not take a vote. I will not change for the purpose of getting reelected. And I had that conversation with some of the leadership down here in Austin who wanted me to do something different than I did. And I said, understand there's a difference between you and I in this. I did not come down here to get reelected. I came down here to do what I said I was going to do. And if the people like that, they will reelect me. If they don't, then they can get whoever they want to do whatever it is they want them to do, because I'm not going to do that.
Yes, sir. I know we're getting close to the end of our time, Senator. I just have one final question for you. Because you answered God's call and got involved, how important is it that Christians get involved in the political process? Maybe share some advice with our audience today.
Absolutely. It actually, our Christians being uninvolved, trying to feel like, it's in God's hands. God's going to take care of it. I don't need to get involved. God will work that out. He doesn't need me. He doesn't use me anyhow. That's a bunch of baloney. He gives us a shovel. We've got a shovel, but he didn't put an automatic motor in. It ain't going to dig the hole itself. He expects us. And the only people we have any responsibility for what they do is ourselves. And they're the only people we're going to ever have to answer for. And what we have done, or what has happened, what has gotten us into the morass we're in, is a failure in our pulpits. Our pastors have failed to preach biblical principles from the pulpit. I'm not talking about preaching politics, Republican or Democrat. I'm talking about preaching biblical principles. They have accepted the misinterpretation of Thomas Jefferson's letter. The wall he talked about in there when he wrote the letter back to the Danbury Baptist ministers had to do with keeping the government out of our churches. Not one word about keeping the church out of our government. There is not one word in the Declaration of Independence or in our Constitution that was intended to be used to keep godly principles out of our government. Not at all. We were founded on Judeo-Christian principles, and it was intended that we governed on Judeo-Christian principles, and our pastors who are more concerned about counting noses and nickels than they are about actually preaching God's word have failed us in our pulpits across the nation. We've got a
Yes, sir.
few that are waking up. I've worked with some that are now coming about. We got a great one down at the Cowboy Church in Corsicana is doing a great deal of work of trying to get God back into our government, as are a number of other pastors. Church I go to, our pastor brought up the issue of people failing to vote and know what they're voting about. And I commended him afterwards for using the 4-letter word in his sermon. And what he told me, I said, you said the word vote. And I said, absolutely right. That's a 4-letter word you need to use more of. But no,
Right.
we have got to get more Christians, people with principles and values in our government. That should be our first priority, because if you are having a working relationship with God in our government is more important than having an in-depth knowledge of property tax or eminent domain or business law or anything like that, because God can work with those who want to work with him.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today, Senator Hall. I know you've got to get to the Senate floor here in just a bit, but I really, again, really appreciate you spending some time with us today. It is an honor that you came on to be our very first guest on our second episode. So thank you so much. And I hope things go well in the remainder of this session for you, sir.
Thank you. I hope so. Appreciate it very much. And when we go there, you may want to watch what's happening today. We had a big bombshell drop last night.
Okay.
There are lawsuits against every one of the propositions that was on the ballot in November.
Yes, sir.
They are now at a standstill. The governor cannot sign them into law with the lawsuit against.
Wow.
So all of that, we've got to figure out how we're going to work around, because that could take 3 years to get through.
Goodness gracious.
Which means that property tax relief and all the other good stuff that were in those propositions is null and void. We'll get figured out. So
sounds like you.
So you might want to pay attention to what's happening, and we get some good material for another podcast.
Yes, indeed. Well, we'd love to have you back again sometime, Senator, if you'd be willing to do so.
Sure.
So
anytime, no, glad to. I really appreciate people like you who are trying to get the truth out. That is what we need more of. Appreciate you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, that wraps up another edition of Patriots Revival and my interview with Senator Bob Hall. I really hope that this episode has been just as inspiring to you as it has been to me in Senator Hall sharing his story and answering God's call to serve and be light in a world of darkness, and answering God's call to help restore God to government, which is exactly what we're trying to do here on Patriots Revival. This week's altar call is for you to read The 5,000-Year Leap by W. Cleon Scouse. You may have remembered Senator Hall mentioning this in the interview, in that this is a book that explains how our founding fathers took a look at republics over the last 5,000 years and took the best parts of those republics and blended those with biblical principles to form two of the greatest documents ever, the Declaration of Independence and our Constitution, which led to the formation of the greatest country ever, our United States of America. So your altar call is to pick up a copy of The 5,000-Year Leap. We will include that information in today's show notes. And of course, each week we end with a verse from Psalm 119:25, which says, "Revive me by your word." So my prayer each and every week is that you will spend some time in God's word and that he will revive you. He will revive your inner faith and your relationship with him, and revive your inner patriot, so that maybe, just maybe, you will want to get involved, to be salt and light in a world of darkness. That's all we have for this week, folks. Thank you so much. See y'all next time. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed the show, please follow us and tell others. If today's show revived your faith and your inner patriot, visit patriotsrevival.com for resources on how to be involved in being salt and light in a world of darkness. Also, are you local to the Ellis County, Texas area? If so, check out the Patriots Revival podcast, the local edition, for info on local issues, candidates and elections, a calendar of events of conservative organizations in the area, and ways for you to get involved. Thanks again for listening. I hope you have a reviving week.